A mother's love. Lily Jacobs was, by all measures, a woman worn thin by the world. Waking up to the sound of her alarm every morning was an uphill battle, as though her body had long since given up on the idea of rest. It had been a long time since she had woken up feeling truly refreshed, long before Nathan had been born, long before she had been thrust into the reality of single motherhood. Now, mornings were simply a countdown to the next challenge she would face. The apartment she and Nathan lived in was small, too small for both of them, really. But it was all they could afford. The walls were thin, the paint chipped, and the single window in the living room let in barely enough sunlight to lift the gloom that seemed to settle in every corner of their cramped space. It was far from ideal, and some days Lily hated it. But no matter how little they had, she made sure Nathan felt safe there. She decorated their living room with pictures of the two of them together, each one a moment she could hold on to amidst the storm of life. Nathan had just turned 7, a bright-eyed little boy with an infectious smile that could light up any room. But lately, Lily noticed something had changed in him. His laughter didn't come as easily anymore, and his eyes often seemed lost, as though he was seeing something far beyond what his young mind could understand. He was growing up far too fast, forced to shoulder the weight of a broken home that wasn't his fault. Lily tried her best to shield him from the worst of it. After all, she had grown up in a broken home herself, and she knew how much it could scar a child. Nathan's father had left when he was still a baby, just weeks after his birth, leaving Lily to pick up the pieces of their shattered life alone. She didn't want Nathan to feel abandoned, to feel that he wasn't enough. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't escape the truth. Things were harder than they had ever been. She had long since stopped asking herself if she was doing enough. It was a question she used to ask when she had a moment to reflect, but now it felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. She simply kept moving, one step at a time, doing what needed to be done to ensure Nathan had food, clothes, and shelter. It was enough, she told herself. But on the quiet nights when Nathan was asleep and she sat alone in the dark, the weight of the truth crashed over her. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She had a steady job at a local bookstore, but the pay barely covered the essentials. It was hard work. Long hours shelving books, helping customers, tidying up the store. But it was a job, and she was grateful for it. Still, the salary was far from what they needed. There were days when Lily had to choose between buying Nathan new clothes and paying the electric bill, when the strain of living paycheck to paycheck threatened to break her spirit. That morning, after a rushed breakfast and a half-hearted attempt at conversation with Nathan, Lily sent him off to school. She watched him walk down the street, his small backpack bouncing as he skipped along. Despite the smile on his face, Lily could see the sadness behind his eyes. She could always see it, even when he tried to hide it. "Hey, Nathan," she called out, her voice shaky despite her attempt to sound cheerful. Nathan turned around, his face lighting up as he waved to her, his hair tousled by the wind. "Bye, Mom. Love you." "I love you too, sweetheart," Lily called back, her heart heavy. She waved as he disappeared down the street, and then turned back to the apartment. She had to get ready for work, and she had to pretend that everything was fine. But as she closed the door behind her, she felt that familiar ache in her chest. Would he be okay today? Was there something more she could be doing to make his life easier, better? The doubt gnawed at her constantly. At the bookstore. Lily arrived at the bookstore with 5 minutes to spare. She rushed through the back door, her apron already in hand, the weight of her exhaustion pressing down on her. The smell of old paper and coffee was comforting, but it also served as a reminder of the life she had chosen, of the small corner she had carved out for herself in the vast, bustling world around her. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The bookstore was busy this morning, the usual crowd of early risers grabbing their coffee and browsing the shelves before work. Lily was used to it. The familiar hum of the store, the sound of pages turning, the soft conversations of book lovers sharing recommendations. It was a distraction from the heaviness that lingered in her heart, and for a few hours, it was enough. But even here, the weight of the world didn't disappear. Her mind kept drifting back to Nathan, wondering what he was doing, wondering if he was happy, wondering if she was enough for him. And then there was the financial strain. The bills were due, and she had no idea how she was going to make the rent this month. Every penny mattered, but every penny seemed to slip through her fingers faster than she could catch it. During her lunch break, Lily sat in the small break room in the back of the store, staring at the half-eaten sandwich in front of her. She wasn't hungry, not really. The stress of the past few weeks had dulled her appetite, and she found herself skipping meals just to get through the day. The constant worry about money, about Nathan's well-being, had consumed her in ways she hadn't even realized. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Mrs. Hazel, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment across the hall. I made some extra soup today. If you and Nathan want to come over for dinner, I'd love the company. Lily smiled softly at the message, grateful for Mrs. Hazel's kindness. The elderly woman had become a steady presence in their lives, a comforting figure who had never once asked for anything in return. It was one of the few sources of comfort Lily had, knowing that, even in the midst of her struggles, there were people who cared about her and Nathan, people who didn't judge them for the mess of their lives. She replied quickly, her fingers typing out a simple response. Thank you, Mrs. Hazel. That would be nice. I'll bring Nathan by after work. At least dinner was one thing she didn't have to worry about. A struggling evening. By the time Lily got home that evening, the sky was already dark, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his legs curled up beneath him, a book clutched in his hands. He looked up when Lily entered, his face brightening momentarily before returning to its usual quiet demeanor. "How was school today?" Lily asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," Nathan replied, though his eyes avoided hers. He had been distant lately, withdrawn, and it broke Lily's heart to see the weight of something unspoken in his eyes. She didn't want to push him, but she couldn't help herself. "Did something happen today?" she asked gently. Nathan shook his head, but there was a hint of something in his expression, something he wasn't saying. Lily felt that familiar knot of worry tighten in her chest. She didn't know what it was, but she knew something was off. The evening passed slowly, as most evenings did. Lily tried to keep things light, trying to coax a smile out of Nathan over a simple meal of soup, but his gaze remained distant. When Mrs. Hazel's homemade meal was finished, and they were cleaning up, Nathan looked up at Lily, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" he asked, his eyes full of a fear that no child should have to carry. Lily's heart shattered. She swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She couldn't show him her own fear, couldn't let him see how much she was struggling. "Of course, we will," Lily said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're okay, Nathan. We're going to be okay." But as she said the words, she knew the truth. She didn't know how they were going to be okay. She didn't know how she was going to keep everything together. But she would try. For him. Always for him. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion. Lily felt as though she were constantly moving, constantly trying to catch up with life. But no matter how fast she ran, the finish line was always just out of reach. The bookstore was busier than usual with the holiday season approaching, and Lily was working long hours to make sure the store stayed organized. The extra money would help, but it was barely enough to keep up with the mounting bills. At home, things were no better. Nathan was quieter than ever. He still smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lily could see the confusion and fear in his small face. The confusion of a child who didn't understand why his mother was always so tired, always so distant, and the fear that maybe, just maybe, they weren't going to be okay after all. Lily kept telling herself that everything would work out, that they just needed to hold on a little longer. But it was getting harder to believe her own words. She had become so focused on providing for Nathan that she had started to forget to care for herself. She was so busy trying to hold everything together that she had forgotten how to feel anything other than stress and fatigue. It was during one of these late nights, as Lily was up cleaning the kitchen and trying to distract herself from the crushing weight of her worries, that Nathan approached her. He stood silently in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her with wide eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice tentative, almost hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" Lily turned around, startled by the question. She put down the dish she had been washing and knelt in front of him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Of course, sweetie," she said, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. "What's on your mind?" Nathan paused for a long moment before speaking, his gaze never leaving the floor. "Why do you always look sad when you think I'm not looking?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. How could he see through her so easily? How had she failed to protect him from the burden of her own struggles? She swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She opened her mouth to speak, but found that no words came. The truth was too painful to say out loud. The truth that she was scared. Scared that they wouldn't make it, scared that her best wasn't enough. But Nathan wasn't finished. He looked up at her then, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find an answer, some way to make everything okay. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly, surprising her. "I just want you to know that I love you, and I don't mind if we don't have a lot of stuff. I don't mind if you're tired. I just want you to be happy. You make me happy." The simplicity of his words broke something inside Lily. She pulled him into her arms, clutching him tightly, unable to speak for the lump that had formed in her throat. She had been so focused on providing for him, on making sure that he had everything he needed, that she had forgotten to just let him love her, to just let him be a child. "I love you too, Nathan," she whispered, holding him close, "more than anything in this world." For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just held each other, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lily allowed herself to cry. She cried for the pain of it all, for the weight she had carried for so long, and for the relief of knowing that Nathan still loved her despite everything. That love was the one thing that had never wavered, and in that moment, it was all that mattered. Finding light in the darkness. In the weeks that followed, Lily began to slowly change. She had always tried to be strong for Nathan, but she realized that strength didn't always mean hiding her struggles from him. She had spent so much time pretending that everything was fine, trying to be the perfect mother, that she had forgotten what it truly meant to lean on each other. Lily started talking to Nathan more openly about the difficulties they were facing, in simple terms that he could understand. She explained how the bills were piling up and how she was doing everything she could to make sure they were okay. She told him that they might not have a lot of things, but they had each other, and that was enough. Nathan, to her surprise, seemed to understand. His quiet concern for her shifted into a determination to help. He began doing small things around the apartment to ease her load, putting his toys away without being asked, offering to help set the table for dinner. And on the rare occasions when Lily would find a moment to rest, he would curl up beside her and hold her hand. And, little by little, they found a new rhythm to their life. It wasn't perfect. There were still tough days, still moments of doubt, but it was theirs. They were in it together, and that, Lily realized, was what mattered most. One evening, after another long day at the bookstore, Lily walked into their apartment to find Nathan sitting at the table with a piece of paper and a crayon in hand. He looked up at her with a shy smile, holding out the drawing he had been working on. "Here, Mom," he said softly. "I made this for you." Lily took the paper from him, her heart swelling with emotion as she looked down at the picture. It was simple, a picture of two stick figures, one much taller than the other, holding hands. Above them, in Nathan's shaky handwriting, were the words, "I love you, Mom. You're my hero." Lily felt her throat tighten as tears welled up in her eyes. She had never realized how much her son had been carrying, how much he had been trying to help her through his own quiet way. "Thank you, Nathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're my hero too." For the first time in a long time, Lily allowed herself to rest. She sat down beside Nathan at the table, the weight of the day lifting from her shoulders as she held him close. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and in that, they were rich. A helping hand. It was around this time that Mrs. Hazel, the elderly woman from across the hall, began to take a more active role in their lives. Lily had always appreciated Mrs. Hazel's kindness, but she had never fully understood the depth of the woman's compassion until she began offering help in small but significant ways. One evening, after Lily had spent a particularly difficult day juggling work and her growing concerns about the future, Mrs. Hazel knocked on their door, a warm smile on her face. She had a covered dish in her hands, the smell of homemade stew wafting through the hallway. "I thought you two might be hungry," Mrs. Hazel said, her voice soft and gentle. "You've been working so hard lately, Lily. You deserve a break." Lily smiled, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She had been so focused on making sure everything was okay that she had forgotten how much it meant to have people who cared, who offered help without hesitation. "Thank you, Mrs. Hazel," Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. "We could really use this." As they sat down together, the warmth of the meal and the comfort of Mrs. Hazel's company felt like a balm to Lily's weary soul. She realized, in that moment, that she didn't have to do it all on her own. There were people around her who wanted to help, people who genuinely cared. It was okay to lean on them, to accept their kindness. In the days that followed, Lily's perspective shifted. She started to open up more, not just to Nathan, but to others as well. She reached out to friends, shared her struggles, and accepted the support that was offered to her. It wasn't easy, it never was, but it was a step toward healing. And in the end, that was all she could ask for.